Okay, so welcome everyone to today's grant writing session. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Elahe Marjovi, and I am the Theater Program Manager at Toronto Arts Council. We are gathering here today with this session to answer any questions you might have about this program and the application. And just make the information more accessible, hopefully. Today here with me are three guest speakers who would introduce themselves momentarily. Two ASL interpreters, Joanne and Dean, as well as one of my colleagues, Joyce, who would manage the chat and help with any technical issues that might come up. So we would start by some introductions and acknowledgements, and then we'll spend about 45 minutes going over the presentation and talk about the program, and we will end the session with Q&A. So now I will pass this over to my colleagues and my guest speakers to give a brief introductions before we start. I pass it to Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you, Elahe. Thank you for inviting me today. My name is Andrea Villanos. I'm currently the Managing Director at Tarragon Theatre. I have been here, I was just realizing that in April it will be 5 years, which is really hard to believe because definitely two of those were COVID years. Prior to that, I worked in dance for many years. I was in dance management at Toronto Dance Theatre and Dance Makers. And I have a background before that in arts education, and I worked for the Laidlaw Foundation for a while in arts funding. I feel very fortunate to have been invited to join the theater committee very recently, and I will attend my first meeting this year. I haven't been to one yet, but I have just recently joined the TAC theater committee as well, and I've served on juries and panels in the private and public sector at the federal level, provincial level, and municipal. Thank you for inviting me, Elahe.
Thank you. And if we are in an alphabetical order, Bianca, if you feel comfortable.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bianca Guimarães, she, her pronouns. I'm the Creative Director of Operations for Generator, and I'm joined here by my colleague, Michael. I will chime in during the presentation as needed, but we'll keep my cameras off for most of it. And Michael, you're next.
Hello, everyone. As Bianca said, Michael Caldwell, pronouns he, him, the creative director of programming at Generator. Yes, I am pretty well immersed in the theater and dance community, mostly in dance, though. My background is primarily there, working in different capacities in the past. I'm also a multi-hyphenate artist, working as a choreographer, dancer, performer, arts advocate, producer, director, writer, and all those things that we all do in the city of Toronto. Also, just a little bit about Generator, which you can view on our website, which is just there in the webinar chat. But really, Generator is a art service organization really designed to provide skills, competencies, experience, and knowledge for different kinds of performing artists, mostly in theater and dance. And we're also an innovation incubator in that we're responding to the different urgent and emergent needs in the community through some of our innovative programming. And again, you can check that all out on our website. And on top of that, really happy to be here and share with you all the things from the TAC's perspective about the Theater Projects Grant. Cheers.
Thank you all so much for being here. Now I'm going to offer a brief land acknowledgement. As we gather today, we want to acknowledge the diversity of the First Peoples of this area and recognize the territories of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island and around the world, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work, to live, and to meet on this territory. Thank you for having us. And I am connecting here. I'm connecting from Toronto Arts Council office in Toronto. Okay, so a brief background about Toronto Arts Council. Toronto Arts Council is the arm's length funding body of City of Toronto. It means that the City of Toronto distributes funding to artists and arts organizations through Toronto Arts Council. And we are driven by two main principles. The first one is that we are an arm's length funding body. It means that the mayor or the city councillors, they don't make any decisions, as well as the second one is that our process are adjudicated by peer review, meaning that people from your community, the artists, like your colleagues, they sit on different panels and they adjudicate the different applications, and they sit on committees, and none of us who work at the council make any decision about the funding results. TAC has two distinct funding envelopes. The first one is the art discipline funding, including, for instance, theater, community arts, which is called creative communities now, dance, visual and media arts, Black arts program, and Indigenous arts program. And the second envelope is the strategic funding envelope. For instance, programs such as Animating Toronto Parks, Open Door, or Artists in the Library are part of that envelope. So what does that mean? It means that applicants are eligible to receive one grant in each envelope every year. However, you could only receive only one grant from the same envelope. So maximum of 2 grants from the 2 different envelopes per year. But you may not apply to a discipline program, for instance, to the theater program, if you have another theater grant already approved and your final report is not submitted. And there's more about the eligibility on our website as well, and you could ask questions later in the presentation. Theater projects. So first, let's see who could apply. You have to be a Toronto resident to apply. It means your postal code has to start with M. Individual artists cannot apply to theater projects. You have to either form a collective or be a nonprofit organization. And to form a collective, 2 or more people can form a collective, and just you put a name on yourself and you could apply. It's that easy. You don't need any registration, nothing. And the project for which your funding is requested must take place in the City of Toronto. And all of this is because our budget is coming from the City of Toronto. So what does the program don't fund? So projects that have started or completed prior to the announcement of the results, as you may know, there are 2 deadlines for this program. One is February 1st, and its second deadline is August 1st. So the projects who will start or finish before June for the first deadline and before November for the second deadline, you cannot apply for those. Individuals, as I have already said, you cannot apply, request funding for ongoing operating costs. You cannot apply for costs related to equipment purchase or capital projects, for instance, to buy a computer or a camera. And also, you cannot request funding for activities that take place outside of the City of Toronto. Okay, let's dive in. I assume that majority of you are already familiar with our application platform, which is called Smart Simple. You could find the link on our website. If you go on the home page at Toronto Arts Council, there's an apply button on the right corner, top right corner. Or you could also type this in your browser and it will give you the access to the homepage, which looks like this screen. So if you already have an account, you will log in easy. And if you don't, you have to register and then log in. You can, once logged in, you will see the applications that are open to you in the homepage. And when you start working on an application, you can save the application at any time before the submission by clicking the save draft. And if you log out and log in again, you won't lose your application. You have time until the midnight of the deadline date to submit your application. That means of midnight on February 1 for this upcoming deadline. And if you don't submit by the midnight, your application will, the status would change to not submitted, basically. But you could still see it in your history of your applications. Few things about access before going into the applications. We offer application access support to applicants who are deaf or have a disability and need support to complete their applications. You could access up to $500 per year to cover the costs of assistance from service providers. And to access these funds, you need to only contact your program manager, in this case me, or if you're applying to even other programs, the respective program managers. Few weeks, I mean 6 is a lot, but even few weeks, at least 2 weeks before the deadline, and let us know and we will tell you about the process. And there's also another option, the accessibility grant, which you could apply to this through your application. You could request maximum of 5,000 towards eligibility, like the accessibility costs for artists involved in the project. I have to emphasize this could be only spent requested for artists, not for the audiences, unfortunately. So if your project involves deaf artists or artists with disabilities and you may require any support, you could access this additional funding through the accessibility grant, which is embedded in your project. Some examples may include ASL interpretation, again, for the artists involved, audio description, closed captioning, or communication assistance, for instance. And that 5,000 is an additional to the grant amount that you are eligible to apply for. So it's an extra money. Okay, so the application. Once you open the application, this is almost what you would see. There's a bar with different sections on the top, as you could see, and today we will try to go into different sections and talk through all of them. The first one is the project description. In this one, you will see the 4 different types of project categories as shown here. Full production is to support the full productions, the productions that are happening at any venue or are part of a season. We don't require a confirmation from like a theater company, but it's better if you have like a confirmation from a venue or from a company to apply to this category. This year, the maximum amount has been increased to 20,000. Production in a festival category, which is for productions at festivals that happen in Toronto, such as Fringe Festival, Next Stage Festival, Summerworks, Luminato, yeah, any festival, any theater festival basically happening in Toronto. And we need a confirmation from the festival for this category. Workshop category, which is for the development phase of your work. I have to emphasize that this is not a playwriting grant. It's not for playwrights to write their grants. It's really for the whole team to come together and test ideas. So the process should involve playwrights, directors, and performers in the room, or designers. And the maximum you could apply for is 15,000. And special initiatives, which is basically anything that wouldn't fit into other categories. You could apply to special initiatives such as a festival or a conference or a symposium, those kind of stuff. And you're always welcome and encouraged to contact me in advance to figure out which category best suits your project. Okay, now let's dive into the questions. So the first part, the first question is the overview. And in this question, this is exactly a screenshot from the application. So there are some hints to help you go through your response, but if I want to explain this to you generally, this question is covering the 5 W's, as most of us know, which are what. It means like, what is your project? Just what is the synopsis? What's the story? Why you are working on this project? Why this project matters? Why is it important right now? For instance, who, if you want to think about it, like who is involved? So talk about the team members. Do you have a co-producer, for instance? Then it means like, can you give us a timeline of your activities? Like, or are there certain milestones that you want to achieve certain goals? Talk about them. And where the project is happening, it means like a venue or a space. If you have that information, yeah, include that. And then the other part is the how. It means like how you are going to undertake the project. You could talk about your process. You could talk about your artistic vision. To address this part, you could also include an artistic statement from the director or from the playwright of the piece. Here I'm going to turn to Andrea in case she has anything to add, because with her experience as a panelist, Andrea, do you have anything? What usually panel members look for when coming to this question?
So in actual fact, this is exactly how I approach a grant. Exactly what are the questions, make sure that we answer them directly and honestly, and think of it in terms of the W's to be sure. And this is more, so I think you've captured it here, Elahe. In terms of how it's read, my comment would be that authenticity, clarity, and succinctness are really important. Being succinct are really important. So ensuring that you capture exactly what you're doing in a way that is easy to read, and oftentimes less is more. So sometimes we think that if we describe it in multiple ways, that's helpful, but it's usually best to make it as direct and honest as possible. That's what I think is the most compelling, because if you think of a group of people reading, let's say 70 applications in the course of a short space of time, the applications that jump out are the ones that are passionate, clear, and easy to follow. I know exactly what this artist wants to do, when, and how they're going to realize their goals.
Thank you, Andrea. Okay, the second question of the project description are about artistic goals and objectives. I've added something here in my slide, just clarifying what do we mean by objective or goals. So objectives are very specific actions or milestones, are short term, and goals are long terms and more general. For instance, goals might be your general goal as a collective, the type of work you seek to do, but the objectives are for that specific project you are applying with. And here again, we have some hints. So what are the main goals and objectives of your organizations or collective? We also understand that sometimes people, for the purpose of this application, come together as a collective only for this project. So it's okay if you don't have a goal for your collective. You could include your individual goals here as well. And then what are the expected outcomes of the project? And how will this project advance your development as an organization or collective, or the development of the artist? As I said, if you want to look at your individual artist and describe it like that, or you want to look at it as a collective, both ways are fine. Any thoughts here, Andrea, about the goals?
No, I think it's beautifully expressed. I think you're very clear. I just come back to this notion of authenticity, ensuring that you write directly from the heart in a very clear way, I think is when you describe these objectives and what you aim to accomplish.
And the third and last part of the project description is about outreach, or in other words, marketing of your work, and the public impact. Of course, the panel looks to understand, what is the public impact of your project, and that's very important for us as a council as well. So what are the audiences you are trying to reach? Try, as Andrea said earlier, try to be very specific. And if you are able to explain the demographics or the groups that you want the work to reach, it's better. And how will you promote the work? That's more about the marketing. Will you use social media? Will you use community groups or service organizations? What are the partnerships that you could make in order to promote the work? And how will this project affect the people who experience it? And that's really about the impact. Depending on the category you are applying with, you might think that this question is not very relevant. For instance, if you are applying to workshop, but I have to say that's not true. Even if you are applying to the workshop category, we encourage you to think about the prospect of the production and really think about the future audiences. So talk about them. And yeah.
Yeah, in fact, and this is an area, I hope you don't mind I jumped in.
No, please.
That I think that sometimes when we're planning our project, we have such a very clear artistic idea of what we want to do and the relevance of it for in our own trajectory artistically, that sometimes we may think this is a less important question. But if you imagine that everyone in the room has been charged to assess the applications in front of them on the basis of the TAC criteria and values, this is a really, as Elahe just said, this is a very important item in the, item's the wrong piece, component, ingredient of your application and of your project. So it's really important to have to consider this in advance as you conceive the project as a whole. Who exactly, even for example, when you start to think about what venue am I going to use, who is the audience that has access to that venue, and maybe is a regular clientele. Who do I want to bring into this group that may not already be coming? How do I reach them in a way that isn't at the last minute, but is something that I'm looking to develop meaningful relationships that potentially I can sustain in the course of my career? So it's just really important to give thought to that, and not if applicants haven't, it's really apparent that it's something that's been done late in the game. So another point is not to reference an organization who you haven't consulted already. Anybody named in an application should be an organization or person with whom you've already made contact, because the community is small, as we know, and people know one another. And when something is cited, it's very possible that somebody in the room may actually be familiar with that organization and able to say, oh, well, that's funny, I was just talking to them and I didn't hear anything about this initiative. That's a surprise. So it's very important to have done this piece of work in a thoughtful way, and to plan it and describe it accordingly.
Thank you, Andrea. So honesty is very important throughout the whole application, really. Now let's go into the budget. Okay, so here you could see a screenshot of the table and how it is presented in the application. On the top left corner, where you could see the budget button, if you click on it, it will open the table and you could add lines and add the numbers. But as you could see, the budget table is divided into two sections, revenue and expenses, and we are going through them line by line shortly. Also in this page, under the budget table, another important piece of information is the supplementary budget document, where you would present the breakdown of everything that you have put into the bigger table above. So now going through the same table. So if, as I said, if you click on that button, it opens the table, and this is what you will see in the revenue under earned revenue, which is the first section of the revenue. I have to say that these budget templates are the same across all the programs at TAC. So there might be some lines in the budget table that are irrelevant to a theater project. So don't feel obligated to fill into all the lines. Just put numbers in front of those that apply to you. And if there's a line is missing, you could always add a row yourself. So in the earned revenue, the most important part is the box office revenue, especially for the productions, full production category, and how to calculate that. There are sometimes productions have merchandise, and sometimes if you are holding a conference, there might be revenue from selling those tickets, but the main thing is the box office revenue. And I was wondering, this is an open conversation here, really, especially about the budget. So is there anything, Andrea, Michael, you want to add about the revenue right here, especially about the box office one, calculating the box office?
Michael, you and I can tag team here. So I'm sure most of you have done something like this already before, but just as sort of a refresher in any case, when it comes to calculating box office, you're going to look at what is it that you think you can charge as a ticket. And when you we're going to look at expenses in a minute, but when you negotiate with the venue where you're going to be performing, if most often they will provide you with, I mean, it depends on the venue, but they'll provide you with box office as part of the rental often. And so those organizations may charge what's called a facility fee in order to, that's often at, let's say, a buck a ticket that will go towards the maintenance of the theater. At Tarragona, it's a capital improvement fund we have, and there's a CIF charge on the ticket price. There's often a service charge if it's purchased online. So you want to make sure that the number that you budget doesn't include all those unless you expense them on the expense side. So you need to ensure you're thinking about, what do I want to net at the end of the day? And what is the maximum that I think I can charge? What's the capacity of this venue? So this theater has 150 seats. If I charge $20 a seat, what am I paying to the venue? And then what am I able to net as a result of that? What is a reasonable box office projection if I'm doing 5 shows? Friday, Saturday, I think I will get 70% houses at $20 a pop. That's X number of dollars. But on Wednesday, Thursday, maybe it's a smaller house. And so I'm going to budget for a smaller attendance. So it's considering attendance, what you want to net, what the capacity of the house is for the length of your performance run. Those are the things some of the things you need to think about as you build that number. Michael, anything to add to that?
No, that was a fantastic overview of the box office line item. That's amazing. But there is a question that came through in the Q&A about workshops and how to handle that revenue line for different kinds of workshops. And I would say, like, for a lot of the revenue, you can leave some of these lines blank if they're not applicable to what your activity is. And certainly for some workshops that I've been a part of and that have been privy to, there are sometimes showings where donations are accepted. There are certain activities that do have income, but I say you could leave this blank. I also defer to Elahe for any kind of things that you've seen in applications as well in terms of workshops and this sort of earned revenue line item as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not expected from you to have a revenue from a workshop, for instance. I mean, none of these are requirements. As I said, like, if they apply to you, fill them out. If they don't apply to your project, don't feel any obligation to put a number in front of them. So workshops, yeah, if you don't have a public presentation, then don't worry about the earned revenue. It's fine. It could be 0. Yeah. Okay. The second part of the revenue after earned revenue is the private sector revenue. And again, as you see, there are some categories, default categories in the table, or you could add your customized categories. For instance, for the in-kind contributions, you can always add a line here. So individual donations, if there are any donations or sponsorships you are receiving for your project, this is the place to record them. Or if you have a co-producer or multiple co-producers, you could add their contributions to this section. And as you see, there's also a status column. where you could choose whether this is a confirmed money or it's still pending. So it doesn't have to be confirmed even when you are applying. If it's like something that it was a verbal agreement or it's just a guess for you, it's fine too. And I want to pause here a bit also to talk about the in-kind contributions, because I think majority of the productions use in-kind contributions but without realizing it. So any service or any product that you contribute to your project like without, that is not monetary, basically, will go to in-kind contributions. So you could put money on it and include them in the budget. It is encouraged to include them because nothing is really for free. For instance, is if you are using your, I don't know, your apartments guest like party room for your workshop, and they are not charging you because you live there, there's still a money that there's still a value to that. So put the value in the revenue, and then later you have to also put that in the expenses, so they will balance each other out. It will be zero, you know, it will be read as free, but importance is that you include all of them in the budget, because they are the actual cost of your project, and it will make your budget more realistic. Or let's say if your friend is giving their service to you, like they're a photographer and they say like, I will take photo for free. Like it's not for free, they're doing you a favor, or they might give you a discount for their service. You could include that as an in-kind. If the discount part of their service, you could put it as an in-kind, say like they're giving you a 200 discount for their service, and then add it to your expense as well. Are there additional thoughts here that you want to add, Andrea, Michael, especially about in-kind? I don't know how clear that was, but.
No, I think that's pretty clear. If there are, generally speaking, there's an interest wherever possible to see a combination of revenues. So you're not necessarily just, the reason I think that Elahe is encouraging the in-kind in addition is that not only to recognize the value of what people contribute, and nothing is free ever in the world, but also we like to know that there are more contributions than just the funding from the TAC, for example. So maybe you've got a contribution from some of the friends of the artist, and they want to give you money. Well, that goes into individual donations. Maybe you've made an application to the Metcalf Foundation for your role as a mentee somewhere. I mean, there are ways to leverage other grants to include in the project.
Yeah, nothing to add on my end, other than to say, like, I think some of it will be conversations that you need to have with different individuals about what things cost to actually understand the true value of what that in-kind might be. So don't be afraid to have those conversations with people about what their services are, and do the research about what things cost, to be able to put the correct numbers into your budgets and grants moving forward.
Yeah, and exactly right. Like you mentioned, these are all different means to make your budget more feasible and present it in a more realistic way. Because as Andrea mentioned, it is okay if your project is entirely reliant on THC funding, but it wouldn't look feasible from the panel's view. So it's good to have different sources of revenue.
And there's some questions coming through in the chat and the Q&A. Did you want to answer them now or wait until
we
we
could,
get past the
yeah,
budget?
let's wait for them and answer them in the end, in the
Okay,
Q&A
just
session.
letting
Yeah.
everyone know we're going to wait till the end.
Yeah. Okay. So, and the last part of the revenue is about the government revenue or the public revenue. So this section may include any other grants that you are applying to, except the foundations, for instance, that Andrea mentioned. So if you are planning to apply to Canada Council, Ontario Arts Council, just include all of those in this section. And again, you could change that status of any of these grants. If you have already received the grant, it's the confirmed funding, a status is confirmed. If you are applying at the same time as you are applying to the THC, that's fine too, and you could change the status to pending. Again, these are different ways to show just like diverse sources of revenue for your project. And the accessibility grant that I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that's you could also include here. So there's a different line for the accessibility grant, and you could add row if not all the councils are included here. Anything about this one, or this one is very clear? Yeah, okay. So let's move to the fun part, which is the expenses. And actually, it's funny always for me, because when preparing a budget, you have to start with expenses. But when we are presenting a budget, we start with the revenue. So this is the part that you should start working from when you are working on your application. I'm going to show what we have on the website, and then Michael will share a table that he has prepared to go through the lines one and give us some examples. So in the table, in the application, we have only included two main categories for the expenses. Artistic production that includes these items that you can see on the screen, like artist fees, production fees, accessibility expenses. And then there's also another category for administration and marketing, which may include any admin costs you have, or like a marketing costs, which are not here in the table, so you have to add a row. But as I said, you can customize the table, so you don't need to follow these categories if they don't work for you. You want to add rows and name them the way you work through your budget, that's fine too. And the only important thing that I want to emphasize before I hand it over to Michael is that please include artist fees based on the standards in the sector, or at least based on the minimum living wage in Ontario. And you can always refer to different theater agreements that we have. There are some names on the screen, like CTA, which are for the companies that work with PACT, the ITA, which are for the non-PACT companies, the Indie 2.2, or the DOT, which is more multidisciplinary. So there are different resources that you can refer to based on the nature of your production. And you could find all these agreements online and see their fees. But I'm going to ask Andrea if she has anything additional to add to this section about the agreement and fee before we jump into the table. Is there any hints to how to navigate them? Sometimes folks find it very intimidating to go through all these agreements.
Yeah, I know you asked me to think about this. You've mentioned all the artist agreements where performers are concerned. There are also agreements where other artists are involved. So if you're working with a composer, you may need to look at There are a number of different organizations that serve the music community. Similarly, for designers, there's something called the Associated Designers of Canada. If you wanted to get a sense of just what general rates might be, even if there are negotiated agreements like the Canadian Theatre Agreement and the ITA, but there are also, it would help you get an idea of where to start, I guess. So artist fees include performers and designers and directors and anyone else who's artistic, and video designers increasingly, right? So there are so many people that refers to. That's all I would say. To do the, you'd need to just consult the existing agreements, and they're all online. Sorry, to your point, Elahe, about how it can be intimidating. Most of the time you can find these things online and spend some time with the documents, and then reach out to peers if you have any questions on, you know, what's the range, you know, what's a reasonable range for this length of time of rehearsals and this length of time for performances as a starting point. That's what I'd suggest.
Thank you, Andrea. It was very ignorant of me to only include the performance, but you're right. There are like more different, like different artists involved, and so different fees and different agreements. Thanks for mentioning that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Michael to share the table.
Great. So everyone gets to laugh at my technical inabilities. 1 second. Sharing screen. Can everyone see this table, this sort of Excel chart? Excellent. Okay.
Yes.
Before I dive into everything, I just want to give my apologies to Dee and Joanne. I'm a fast talker, so please just let me know if I'm going too fast for the ASL interpretation. And as well, I may not be able to see everyone, so just interrupt me if I'm going too fast or if there's a question or a point of clarification along the way. But yeah, I was tasked to put forward and talk a little bit more about expenses in particular. And before I dive into the information that's on the TAC Smart Simple system, I just wanted to bring forward 3 different things that I like to think about and just put in an overall frame. One is that when you're applying for a project and you're drawing from different funding sources, take a look at all the different grants that you're applying to, foundations that you're applying to, just to see what all those grants look like, what all the budget forms look like, because mainly they're very similar, but there's some slight differences that you're going to find. And it's just helpful to know what kind of information you're asking for. One thing that I always talk about when I'm helping folks with their grants is I just put forward, you know, we live inside of capitalism. That's the frame of how we operate. And we're often told that our creative work and our creative labor is not valued or undervalued, and we undervalue ourselves. So really, I think it's an exercise of valuing our work and valuing what we do, and really putting that into a frame as we move forward with grant applications. And talking about money can sometimes be awkward, uncomfortable, difficult, depending on our own relationship to money as well. So I think just really starting to engage in healthy conversations about money is a huge part of putting together budgets and applying for grants, and that we can have healthy conversations about money. One more thing to put forward before I dive too far in is just to say, you know, there's a wild imagination of projects that happens out there in the theater community. This and what I'm putting forward today does not at all encapsulate all of the many, many different kinds of imaginative things that can come forward to a theater projects grant jury. So I've done my best to include as much as I can. I've of course left roles out, I've left expenses out. There's many other kinds of things, and we can work through that in the Q&A session as well. So in the expenses, I just decided, and I always do this with myself, I always like to create my separate chart with my budget. I don't like to just enter numbers in the system itself, because I'm always worried that it'll disappear or it'll erase somehow. I always like to have it in a separate place, so I create a new chart every time. So here we are with expenses and artistic production, and you'll see here the 5 categories that are listed on the Smart Simple system. Fees, I always like to think of as people. So whenever we're talking about fees, we're talking about actual human beings, actual people that are part of your project. So artist fees are the artists. So, and this could include the actors, dancers, musicians, designers, dramaturgs, outside eye, cultural consultants, basically anyone that is artistically contributing to your project. For all of these fees, I always like to just have a conversation with folks and see if they collect HST. Not everyone collects HST. I believe right now it's, the threshold is if you make $30,000 in a certain time period, you are required by CRA to register for an HST number. So some individuals have done that and now collect HST. It's really as simple as a question to the people you're working with. Do you collect HST or do you charge HST? And then you can include that into your line items for artist fees, production technical fees, and so forth. Back to production technical fees, those are the stage managers, production managers, technicians, intimacy directors, fight directors. Just a note here, a lot of folks are working with different sets of values, viewing their work as creative collaborations, all of the people that are in the room as creative collaborators. So some folks like to include everyone as artists in their work. I would still encourage you to separate out artist fees and production and technical fees. It doesn't change the values that you have with how you work with people in the room, but it does help a jury understand, in a more traditional sense, where your money is going and how it's balancing between artist fees and production and technical fees. I'm not sure if that makes sense, and we can unpack that in the Q&A if we need to. Exhibition and programming fees, as Elahe said, not something that usually comes up in theater project grants. This is more for the visual arts grants. Again, the template is the same across the board, but there could be a curator, there could be a programmer in your workshop or project, and that's where this person would go. Cataloging, publication, documentation. I like to put archival video and photo in this line item, whether that's an actual person or some of the materials meant for that. Also, a note taker or documentarian may also be a part of your project as well. That's important to consider and include that here in this particular line item. And accessibility expenses, Elahe has already described what that is, but this is where all of those expenses that were related to accessibility can go. And then add row is your best friend, I would say, in pretty much any grant that you're applying for. You just really want to be as specific as you possibly can and answer those, those who, what, when, where, why, how questions. Where is my project going to happen? What are the studio rentals and theater rentals for my project? I always prefer to separate out rehearsal and performance spaces so that a jury can really see this is the amount of money going to rehearsals and this is the amount of funding and time going to performances. As it was alluded to earlier, some venues will include personnel fees in their overall quote to you and other materials fees. I personally like to keep everything in theater rentals and keep it all contained because it's a really clear idea of what's being offered by the theater. And then you can describe what that is in the supplementary budget notes, which is also one of your best friends, including the ad row. The equipment rentals, I mean, gosh, there's so many different kinds of projects: sound, lighting, digital equipment, rigging equipment for aerial work, you name it. Any kind of equipment that you need for your work to accomplish your work goes here. You may also, depending on how much equipment you have, divide that into separate line items to make it really clear for folks as well. Materials, costume materials, props, sets. In a workshop setting, there's papers, pencils, binders for the different kinds of scripts that come forward. There's different kinds of flooring and chairs. There's so many other kinds of materials, but all those expenses, you may in fact have travel expenses if you're bringing in someone from outside the city of Toronto to work. So that's accommodation, travel, per diem. Freight and shipping, perhaps you're shipping a set piece from somewhere across the country that needs to arrive and there's costs related to that. Permits and insurance, not every performance happens inside of a theater. There's a lot of performances that happen outdoors. So outdoor permits, noise exemptions, and then insurance coverage is also something that we don't necessarily think about, but more and more also through the pandemic. Even to rent certain kinds of studios, you have to have insurance coverage. I've just put forward 3 organizations that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's others. PAL Canada, Hub International, and Front Row Insurance. They each have different kinds of insurance that they offer, both for individuals or companies, both for performance, both for rehearsals. A little bit of online research will really give you, and conversations with these companies will really help. And then royalties and permissions. You know, sometimes we're working with music and we have to pay SOCAN fees. Sometimes we're working, acquiring a script that we want to work with, and the fees that we need to pay to those particular kinds of companies. There's a lot here, and there's a lot that's not included here, but basically just to put forward that there's so much that you can put forward in these grants in terms of expenses. And I just want to pass over to Elahe and Andrea if there's anything else here that just needs a little bit more unpacking specifically. Okay, I see some. Okay, great, amazing. And then as we move down to administration and marketing, which is, you know, quite a big section. Even I just want to put forward a few things. One is that administration fees, you may have a producer or a production assistant working with you, but more than anything, really budget for your own administrative time that's separate from your artistic work. So the time that you're spending scheduling or organizing collective meetings or communicating with all of your collaborators to try to get people in the room, that's your time, and that has a value to it. So really budget for your own administrative time. And in this administrative fees, I always prefer, if I have marketing expenses, to separate that from admin expenses so that it's really clear what kinds of fees are going to administrative and going to marketing. That's just my own personal preference, but I think it's really helpful also seeing that in a budget as well. Fundraising events, you may not have fundraising events, but if you do, you may have artists that you're paying to perform at your fundraising event. You may have a space rental or equipment rental. You want to put all of that into the fundraising event line item and then explain what that is in supplementary notes. You may think that because, you know, you're paying artists, that somehow those artists need to be put up above in the production, and that's not the case. You really want to keep all of the fundraising in one container so that it's really clear what's happening with your fundraising event. And then other fundraising is like online, you know, fundraising campaigns, the costs of the different perks that you're going to give to the people that donate to that online fundraising campaign. Just there's a lot that can go in those 2 line items, but I think that's the general gist, is to keep all the fundraising together in one place. And then again, ad row is your best friend. Marketing and promotional fees, again, the people that may be working on your project, it's a PR strategist, social media coordinator, media fees, a graphic designer, maybe a website administrator. There's many other roles here that can exist as well that I haven't named. Media expenses, perhaps you have monthly or annual fees for Zoom or for a website. Maybe there's platform fees as well. You know, media expenses, targeted ads on Instagram or Facebook. If we're still doing postcards, then printing costs for postcards, it would still be something. I don't know if we're doing like that anymore, but anyway, that exists. And that would definitely go into media expenses. And then supplies, like what are the supplies necessary for the folks that are doing the administration and the marketing to do their job? So that's paper, that's staples, that's like the hard kind of costs that do add up, if especially in a project that's quite long term. 2 more things within expenses that I always like to bring forward through the tremendous advocacy of many organizations like Balancing Act, for instance, and many other organizations. I see this line item of care come up more and more in projects, not only at an organizational level, but also with collectives and also with individuals and different types of grants. And this really is addressing childcare, family care packages. Like what is necessary in order for the people that you have in the room to do the best job that they can? And more, I'm seeing care as a line item in different project grants. I would pass it over, and maybe not now, but Elahe will probably have more to say about what that looks like in different project grants. But I'm starting to encourage the folks that I'm working with to include a line item for care. And it can just be a very small amount, but just a line item for care. And then contingency, the big mystery of contingency. It's important because projects change over time, emergencies come up, costs are rising. You know, an actor could fall ill, and then you have to replace that actor last minute. There is an administrative cost. There is a huge, there's cost to this. Contingency varies, and it's often a percentage of your overall budget. But it can be, it really varies depending on the kind of project that you have. And I'm really interested to hear how others think of that as well on the panel in terms of contingency. But I'm going to just push forward a little bit more into supplementary budget notes. And really, you just want to describe your numbers and include everything in your supplementary budget. You want to provide all the relevant calculations, add more written context, very short, but if you need to describe something, please do describe it. Provide the clarity with all the in-kind fees and expenses, the clarity of the materials that you already own as well that you'll be using for the project, and really unpack and describe that care and contingency line items. And really here, the question is, how did I arrive at this number? And that could be through a number of ways, you know, a documented fee structure, and through negotiation, through something related, you know, maybe I arrived at this fee in negotiation and it's related to the experience or knowledge this person has in the field, their years of experience. For an expense, it can be anticipated based on the current research that you've done about pricing for a flight or for what something costs to rent. And basically you just want to respond to any question that you could foresee coming forward. And is this expense necessary for the successful and healthy completion of my project? And I like to put healthy in there because there is something very particular. Yes, something to be successful, but also what is care and what does health look like, and how are we supporting folks and individuals in the room as we're moving forward in our projects? And this will be said probably again, but it's always good to have someone read and reread your grants, including your budgets, to offer feedback, because they're going to bring forward questions that you may not have thought of. And just to say and put out there that Generator, the organization I work for, does offer the one-to-one consultations with grant writers, with folks that are looking for help with their grant writing. We review your grant and can look over that kind of stuff as well. Of course, there's also friends and colleagues as well that can look over your materials. And just wanted to put this forward. These are the organizations that I know of that have fee structures that are available online for you. The CTA and ITA have been referenced, again, Associated Science Canada, League of Composers, CATA for dance, CARFAC, and RAAV for visual arts. And also just to flag different local and provincial specificities, you know, as you're working in different ways, different folks in different places have different relationships to how much they're paid in terms of a local setting, in terms of a national setting. So just really be cognizant of that. These are Canadian standards, and I would highly recommend using these across the board. But just note that there are different provincial, what's the way of saying this, provincial relationships to funding and to fees as you're looking into filling that into your budgets. Gosh, did I hit everything? I think that's all. And I pass over to Elahe and Andrea if there's any other thoughts or questions around this as well, or anything moving forward.
I would just underscore that was really great, Michael. You hit all the right notes. I think you got it all. I would just reiterate that would you scroll up just a bit for a minute?
Yeah.
So go here, the supplementary budget notes are listed. I'm going to go backwards. I
Yeah.
just really want to reiterate what you just said about the importance of including your calculations. It's really important. It's something, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because if you put a lump sum, it may or may not read to somebody, depending on the background. You know that that person, again, for example, the in-kind. So photography usually costs X number of dollars, but you're only paying this, or you're paying like 10 times as much. So if you are able to indicate where you got the number, it's really important. So I wanted to reiterate that. And go up again, please.
Absolutely.
The care, I just want to say thank you for bringing that up. It increasingly, it's a conversation we're all having since we've come back after the pandemic, talking about life-work balance, work-life balance. What does that look like? When you finish the project, you want to be tired in a healthy way and recharged, as opposed to tired and spent and burned out. So it's something we're all talking about. And I work at a company, so I just want to say that this is a conversation that is sector and industry wide. And when you broke down the media expenses, this is really a minor point, but I just would say I really like to see advertising separated from fees, for example. So you made it when you talked about Instagram and Facebook, that's perfect, right? So I'm going to take so many Google ads out, and this is what I'm spending on advertising and to get the word out, and this is what the costs are attached to my web fees and my internet costs on a monthly basis, or and I'm amortizing a quarter of those into this budget, for instance. I would just encourage you to separate that out. It's a very minor point.
Thank you for catching that. Yeah, that's great. So maybe I will stop sharing my screen and pass it back to Elahe. Is that?
Oh, sorry, I'm going to say one more thing. Your contingency thing. No, you can. It's fine. You can close it if you want. Drama. Contingency and what the percentage is I made a note that you wanted to talk about that. That's a really tough one up, and I often budget quite high on that. And then I've had friends I totally agree. You always have someone in everything I do. I have someone else read my stuff. We all make mistakes. We all have typos. We all think we've explained something clearly when we haven't. Same with a budget. So I always have somebody review my stuff, often more than one. And people have different opinions about contingency, but I tend to be, particularly with cost inflation so high right now, I would definitely use like a 5%. But I'm not sure if that would be kosher for the TAC. So I don't know if there's a number that the TAC considers appropriate, but things change all the time, and something, suddenly your video projection requires, your projector died and you needed to bring another one in, for instance. I mean, stuff happens. So being able to respond to that, that's what that contingency line item speaks to. So I'm not quite sure what the right number is. And after years in the business, I'm still not sure, but I know there needs to be something there, because things just happen as a project unfolds, and creative minds come together and work develops, and that's the exciting part.
I'm also reflective of that. Like, I have a really hard time with contingency, and even through my years, it's through conversation that you have with other folks that are viewing the grants, where you kind of arrive at a number that makes sense for you. And it's very specific to each project. I would say it's not a one size fits all. It's definitely a one size fits one in terms of project grants and what contingency is. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael and Andrea. I echo everything you said and you shared. Just what you said about the care, I wanted to add that not only the care, but also every line item that Michael shared with us, they are all eligible expenses for THC grants. So don't be hesitant to include them if they're relevant to your project. And again, not everything is relevant to every project, so you have to be able to find what is right for your own budget, but these were just some examples. And contingency, yeah, I agree, Andrea. I think not everyone really includes them, but you're right. But it should be considered. 5 to 10, I would say, it's the common, but also it depends on the size of the budget. Sometimes it's a huge budget, and then suddenly contingency is like 10,000 is the amount of the request. So it may not look feasible, but so it depends. But I definitely agree that it's better to include contingency, even if it's a small percentage. Okay, so let me share my screen and we continue. And then we can look back at the budget during the Q&A again. Okay, so after the budget section, the last part of the application is for the support material, which is very important, although it's in the last section, and sometimes people, don't pay a lot of attention until the last minute to the support material. I can't emphasize on the importance. Maybe Andrea could say more about it, but what I always say is like support material can make or break your application. If it's strong, it will really boost your application, and if it's something weak, it will ruin everything that your application has talked about. So be very selective and about it, and spend time with the support material. We ask for at least one relevant support material to your project. So try to include at least one support material that is relevant. For instance, if it's a script sample or it's a video of a workshop you have done, please include those. And of course, you will have a space to add additional support material from your previous work if you think it's helpful for the panel to understand your work. But spend time with it and do your best to present something that is acceptable, at least for yourself as well. Andrea, any other thing about the support material?
No, I think that's perfectly said. You're right. It makes or breaks it. So it's important to give something thoughtful that reflects the intention behind the work or the practice, your artistic practice. Michael can also speak to this. I know he's been on lots of juries. So,
I mean, yeah, I think it's gosh, what to say about these additional items. They're just, I mean, just to reiterate that they're really important. And especially video, if you have video, especially if you're moving into a production, it's really great to be able to see what's happening. We are a visual form, like, and it's good to just be able to experience and get the energy of what you're putting forward. So as much passion as you put into the writing, seeing that passion in letters of support, seeing that in videos, I think is really important to consider as well.
Thank you. And that's it for the application. The application will be completed after the support material. On this slide, I have included some tips, like just general grant writing tips, that some of them we already talked about. Read the guideline. I think there's the link to the guideline is in the chat, but read through the guideline for any grant you are applying to. Talk with the program contact prior to applying. It's always helpful to discuss your ideas and give yourself time. Don't apply last minute. And as we said multiple times, use clear and direct language. And remember, you are not writing a thesis, a master thesis, or a journal paper. You're writing for your peers. So there's no pressure for the writing. Don't be afraid. Just as long as it's clear and direct, it should be good. And again, have someone to review your application. As Michael suggested it too, it's always good to have a third eye. And especially if it's someone who is not familiar with your project, it's better, because then you could ask them what did they understand from the application, what could they get from your project. And follow the instructions, and after submitting it, regardless of the results, always call for feedback, which will be helpful for the future rounds. Okay, thank you so much.